Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere hot, dry, and older than your inbox full of unread emails. Ancient Mesopotamia. You're stepping into the middle of a buzzing, sun-drenched city. Maybe Ur, maybe Babylon, maybe a little riverside village that no one writes songs about, but should. You're walking slowly because the dust clings to your sandals, and the air smells like bread, onions, and something slightly fermented. Which makes sense, because beer is everywhere. You pass clay houses, the occasional bleating goat, and yes, groups of people holding wide ceramic mugs filled with an amber-ish liquid that's, well, let's be honest, probably not cold. It's 42 degrees Celsius in the shade, and shade is more of a theory than a guarantee. The beer tastes earthy, a bit sour, and thick with tiny bits of barley sediment. You take a cautious sip and realize it's warm, like bath water that's forgotten its purpose. And the worst part, everyone seems fine with it. Welcome to your sleepy walk through one of humanity's oldest challenges. How on earth do you keep beer cold when refrigerators won't be invented for another 4,000 years? You're going to learn the tricks, the science-ish hacks, and the mild chaos that surrounded ancient Mesopotamian beer life. Spoiler alert, it involves clay pots, temple goddesses, and some pretty committed experimentation. You probably wouldn't survive this heat without at least 3 beers a day, and guess what? That's basically the average Mesopotamian wellness plan. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments if you're still awake. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward into the middle of the marketplace, where vendors yell over carts of dates and stacks of fish, and somewhere behind them, the clink of mugs hitting low tables reminds you that beer isn't just for the rich or the festivals. It's absolutely everywhere. Ancient Mesopotamians drank beer more than water, because water could be sketchy. Beer was boiled, fermented, flavored, and relatively safe. Think of it as an early health drink, like kombucha's funky great-great-grandparent. The Sumerians, one of the earliest civilizations in this region, were total beer romantics. They believed beer was a gift from the gods, and honestly, if you lived in 2500 BCE and had no fans, no sunscreen, and about 3 vegetables to work with, you'd probably think so too. Beer soothed workers, inspired poets, and even lubricated tax collection. Some clay records literally list beer as part of a government salary. Imagine getting your paycheck today in barley beer instead of direct deposit. Now, you glance around and notice something odd. Nobody's adding ice cubes. That's because they didn't have ice cubes, and frankly, you're beginning to suspect that cold drinks might not even be a thing here. But don't worry, they cared. They tried. Right now, the beer you're holding is in a slightly damp, unglazed clay mug. It's warm, but also surprisingly cool on the outside. That's because it's been sitting in a kind of ancient drink cooler called a zir, or evaporative pot, though the Mesopotamians didn't call it that. They just knew it worked. Unglazed clay sweats when filled with water. That sweating cools the contents slightly as the liquid evaporates off the outside. You're drinking science at room temperature. Historians still argue whether this technique was fully understood in terms of heat physics, or if people just noticed it worked and ran with it. Either way, the knowledge spread. These pots became standard in beer storage, especially in taverns where drinkability mattered more than style. Meanwhile, in the back alley of this marketplace, you spot a man rolling a giant sealed clay jar toward a half-sheltered cellar built into the dirt. That's another trick. Go underground. Mesopotamians dug deep storage pits, shaded them with reeds or clay roofing, and let the earth's steady, cooler temperature keep things mildly less awful. Not icy, but better. There's something quietly admirable about all this effort for something you might only drink a few gulps of at a time. But beer wasn't just a beverage. It was a cultural cornerstone, a daily staple, and for many, a reason to get up in the morning. Or at least a reason to get up and stagger slightly sideways toward the barley shed. And yes, barley. You're going to hear a lot about barley. Wheat existed, but barley was cheaper, hardier, and loved fermentation like a moth loves lamp oil. Sumerian beer often wasn't filtered, wasn't carbonated, and didn't always smell like success. But it had alcohol, nutrients, and a genuinely comforting texture if you were into that kind of thing. Like a smoothie. But medieval. You take another sip. Maybe you're warming up to it. Or maybe it's just already warm. A soft breeze rustles the linen curtains at the entrance of a nearby tavern. You peek in. It's dim, filled with soft clay oil lamps and a few low stools made of woven rushes. Behind the counter, really just a flat clay slab, sits a priestess of Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. Her head is wrapped in fine cloth, and she's muttering while pouring beer from a tall, slender jar that looks like it's been polished with sand for years. You don't speak Akkadian, but she's probably chanting the ingredients under her breath. Or a prayer. Or both. That's right. Beer and religion went hand in hand, which, let's be honest, makes church a bit more interesting. And stick around, because we're going to meet that goddess and her hymn in just a few minutes. But first, another sip. The beer's cooled just a little more now. The clay's done its quiet job. Not bad, Mesopotamia. Not bad. You're still in the dim interior of that tavern, watching the priestess with the steady hands and half-smile. She pours another jar of beer with the grace of someone who's done it 10,000 times, and still secretly enjoys the sound it makes hitting the cup. It's thick, frothy, and swirling with barley grains, not exactly Instagram-worthy, but deeply satisfying in its own gritty way. Let's rewind a bit, just for a moment. Because before anyone started coolin' beer in shady courtyards or whispering prayers to beer goddesses, someone had to figure out how to make the stuff. And that brings us to barley. You are now ankle-deep in a threshing yard, surrounded by dust, chaff, and exactly 0 machines. It's harvest season in ancient Sumer, and you're working a long day for a short cup of beer. Barley is the star of the show. It's resilient, grows fast, and doesn't throw a fit if the soil is mediocre. Ancient Mesopotamians would soak barley in water, let it sprout just enough to activate the sugars, then dry and crush it into a kind of crude malt. The result, a sweet, fermentable base. From there, the grainy mush was mixed with water, sometimes flavored with dates or herbs, and left to ferment in the sun. If you're picturing steel tanks and sanitized tubing, please stop. You're standing in a clay pit, watching men stir soupy mash with wooden paddles the size of canoe oars. Everything smells vaguely nutty, damp, and alive. And the yeast, that just floats in naturally from the air. Modern brewers would break out in hives. Historians still argue whether this natural yeast method was truly understood or just blindly trusted. But trust it they did, and lo and behold, bubbles appeared, moods improved, and beer happened. Simple, reliable, sort of. The bragging rights came next. Brewing wasn't just a domestic chore, it was a competitive art. And people got very invested in who made the best brew. Taverns in larger cities like Nippur or Kish gained reputations for especially strong or smooth beer. Your average brewer might be a humble housewife, or a temple-backed professional with a flair for dramatic pours and a signature date-flavored recipe. In fact, a tablet from the 19th century BCE, now just a broken chunk sitting in a museum, details a beer order for a royal banquet. The quantities involved would make even the most enthusiastic fraternity nervous. So yes, beer was also about scale. You weren't just sipping with friends, you were feeding armies, paying workers, and impressing visiting diplomats. Which brings you, barley in hand, to the Hymn of Ninkasi. Picture it, a poem carved into clay in 1800 BCE, sung aloud by brewers to remember the steps of the process. It's possibly the world's oldest brewing manual, and definitely the only one that includes a musical number. The opening lines honor Ninkasi, the goddess who satisfies the desire and pours over the filtered beer of the collector vat. Romantic, no? It's also a mnemonic device. You're squatting over a cauldron of bubbling barley mash, the sun in your eyes, your sandals soggy with something. What do you do next? Sing the next line. The hymn becomes your to-do list, your religious offering, and your HR handbook all at once. You hum along with it now, under your breath, and your neighbor elbows you playfully. Missed the part about the strainer jar, he jokes, in a Sumerian dialect you somehow magically understand. It's fine. Nobody's perfect. There's another moment here that deserves your quiet attention. Imagine being the person who first realized this process could be repeated, who noticed that soaked grain plus time equals something new, mildly fizzy, and emotionally clarifying. They didn't write it down, they didn't patent it, but they passed it on, and it worked. So now you're walking through a brewing courtyard. The floor is packed clay, slick with spilled mash. Bees hover lazily over date syrup pots, and someone's kid is stacking broken mugs for fun. You peer into a large ceramic vat, half beer, half science experiment. The foam smells slightly sour. It's perfect. And that's when it hits you. Nobody drinks beer alone here. It's always communal, always loud, always accompanied by a casual exchange of gossip, weather complaints, and vague existential musings. Beer isn't a luxury. It's baked into the rhythm of the day, like naps and goat herding. In fact, at this very moment, a priest is sipping beer through a straw taller than your arm. And yes, we'll get to that straw eventually. You pause for another sip, letting the warmth settle. It's not refreshing in the way we modern folks think of refreshment. It's more like edible comfort. Liquid bread. Something to soften the edges of a hard day. Now, just when you're getting used to the vibe, a man with a very serious beard approaches. He's holding a clay tablet. He mumbles something about inventory, then points toward the brewery's stockroom. Apparently, even in 2000 BCE, someone always has to check the numbers. You follow him to a low storeroom with rows of sealed jars. Some have faint markings, symbols scratched in while the clay was still damp. These indicate batch type, quality, flavor additives, and most importantly, date. Not expiration date, mind you. These beers could keep surprisingly well if sealed correctly. Inside the cool, shadowy room, the air is thick with the smell of fermentation and wet clay. You feel suddenly, pleasantly sleepy. There's something rhythmic about the whole process, like baking, but more unpredictable. You imagine doing this every day, humming the hymn, watching for the perfect bubble, arguing about foam. That's the heartbeat of ancient Mesopotamian beer culture. Part religion, part routine, part friendly one-upmanship. The barley might change slightly depending on the harvest. The taste might vary depending on the humidity or your mood. But the ritual, that stays. And somewhere, just beyond the courtyard, you hear laughter and the faint clink of mugs again. The tavern's calling. Maybe the beer's cooled down just a little more by now. You're back outside again, padding quietly across sun-warmed bricks as the shadows stretch long across the alleys of the city. The tavern you just left hums behind you, the sort of low, comforting background noise that feels like a lullaby for grown-ups. Laughter, murmured gossip, and the wet clack of ceramic against ceramic. The sun's beginning its lazy descent, casting everything in gold. Time to explore another layer of this beery tapestry, how beer actually reached the people who needed it. Because brewing is only half the equation. You've got to distribute it. This is no simple feat in a city where roads are more suggestions than infrastructure, and the wheel is still a relatively new idea. But leave it to the Mesopotamians. They were logistical masterminds in sandals. They didn't just make beer. They made sure everyone, from bricklayers to bureaucrats, had access to their daily rations. You pause in the middle of a busy street as 2 donkeys saunter by, each carrying a woven crate packed with tightly sealed clay jugs. Each jug is plugged with cloth and wax, labeled with a thumbprint-sized stamp. You squint. The markings indicate where it came from, who brewed it, and maybe even what type it is. Sour, sweetened with dates, aged 3 full weeks in a basement that smelled like onions. The codes are basic but meaningful. Historians still argue whether these transport records were formal contracts or just informal agreements scratched into clay. But what's clear is that beer moved fast for something so sloshy. You follow the donkeys for a bit, and they lead you to a riverside loading area. A few teenage boys are hoisting amphorae, tall, narrow-necked jugs onto a flat-bottomed boat. The Tigris glistens nearby. Boats were beer trucks, before trucks were a thing. Some were rowed, others pushed with poles. But all of them moved beer, sometimes hundreds of jugs at a time, to villages and city markets downriver. You imagine sitting on one of those boats, gently bobbing in the current, surrounded by the slosh of beer and the occasional argument about who forgot to seal a lid. It's soothing in a chaotic sort of way. The wind, the lap of water against the boat, and the knowledge that you're moving something deeply precious to thirsty workers in need. Which reminds you, beer wasn't just for fun. It was pay. You step inside a ziggurat construction site now, one of those stepped temples that rise like a layer cake into the sky. Hundreds of workers are bustling around, hauling bricks, shaping clay, and looking sunburnt enough to qualify for divine intervention. But spirits are high. Why? Because it's ration time. Mesopotamian laborers, especially government or temple workers, were often paid in beer rations. You could be a stonemason, a scribe, or a gardener. and your daily wage might be a few liters of barley brew. Children received smaller rations. Even priests and priestesses had their quotas, which were sometimes terrifying generous. You wake slowly on a mat woven from date palm fronds, in a room that smells like sun-baked clay and faintly sour grains. Outside, the city is already stirring, and today you're being invited into one of the most sacred, secretive places in ancient Mesopotamia, the temple brewery. Now, when you hear temple, you might picture solemn rituals, smoky incense, and quiet worship. And yes, all of that exists here. But alongside all the chanting and holy symbols, there's something more grounded. Vats of fermenting beer, rows of amphorae, and a very stern woman holding a paddle the size of a canoe oar. She's not just a brewer. She's a priestess of Ninkasi, and she is not here for your nonsense. You follow her inside a long, shadowy room where the walls are lined with earthen vessels. It's cooler here than outside, but not by much. There are no ice boxes or breezeways, just thick walls and a careful balance of airflow and shade. Still, for the time, this is about as climate-controlled as it gets. The priestess gestures for you to help stir one of the open vats. The smell hits you instantly, sour, yeasty, and somehow warm. It's not unpleasant, but it's certainly not subtle. You reach for the paddle and begin stirring, slowly. The mixture resists, thick and lumpy. She nods approvingly. Here in the temple, beer isn't just sustenance. It's a divine offering. It's brewed in accordance with ritual, with each stage carefully timed, chanted over, and blessed. The ingredients are weighed with ceremony. The tools are cleaned with what passes for soap, ashes and oil mostly, and the first batch always goes to the gods. This version of beer is different from what the workers drink. It's often stronger, smoother, and occasionally spiced with exotic additions, coriander, honey, or even crushed cedar bark. The point isn't just intoxication. It's symbolic, spiritual, and, yes, just a little bit political. Historians still argue whether temple brews were truly exclusive or just a fancy label slapped on common beer. But it's clear that these batches were treated with extra care, consumed in rituals, and occasionally traded as elite gifts. Your arms ache slightly as you stir. The priestess doesn't stop you. She's off to prepare the filtering straw, a reed bundle carefully wrapped in woven fibers. No sieves here. Drinking unfiltered Mesopotamian beer straight from the jar is like slurping oatmeal through a trumpet. That's why you'll need a straw as long as your arm, and likely as holy as any relic. You sit in the shade with her afterward, sipping from a communal jar through the long reed. The beer is surprisingly smooth. Temple quality, definitely. She tells you in a low voice that the recipe is recorded in a hymn, passed down from priestess to priestess. If you forget a line, the batch fails. If you spill the mash, the goddess frowns. If you taste it before the final blessing, well, no one talks about that. There's something soothing about being here. The temple is quiet, coolish, and filled with the sounds of bubbling pots and soft chanting. You can almost feel the beer fermenting beside you, alive in its own gentle way. In another corner of the room, 2 apprentices are grinding sprouted barley with flat stones, humming a hymn. The rhythm is hypnotic. Scrape, scrape, pause. Scrape, scrape, pause. It's part brewing, part meditation. You take a moment to walk past the storage jars. Each one is sealed with stamped clay, symbols for the batch number, priestess, date, and intended ritual. You imagine an archivist's dream, beer records stretching back generations, each jar its own tiny time capsule of devotion and flavor. Outside, in the temple courtyard, the goddess Ninkasi has her own shrine. You wander over, cup in hand, and stare up at her statue, part woman, part grain basket, part mystery. She holds a pitcher in one hand and a stalk of barley in the other. Birds flutter nearby, and someone has placed a small offering of dates at her feet. A group of children pass through the courtyard, giggling as they carry little cups. Training, perhaps? Or just catching the leftovers? Even in ancient times, it seems, beer appreciation started young, though most children drank it diluted and only on special occasions. You hear the temple bell, really just a bronze disc struck with a wooden mallet, and know that the ceremonial tasting is about to begin. Everyone gathers in a semicircle. The priestess dips a ladle into the day's first completed jar, raises it to the sky, and pours a small portion onto the earth with a soft chant. You sip along with the rest, tasting the product of hours of work, weeks of preparation, and centuries of tradition. It's cloudy, warm, and oddly comforting. You're not drinking for pleasure. Well, not entirely. You're drinking to be part of something older than writing, older than kings, older than many gods. It's easy to forget. But this isn't just a history of beer. It's a history of people trying to find meaning in grain, water, and time. Later, as the sun hangs low and the courtyard cools, the priestess invites you to sit once more beneath the palm awning. She passes you a fresh reed straw. This one, she says, is made from reeds that grew during the last flood. Extra lucky. You sip again, and just for a moment, you feel like you could stay here forever, in this quiet, sacred brewery where faith and fermentation blur, where every bubble tells a story, and where beer isn't just a drink. You've had a sacred sip. You've watched beer flow as rations, offerings, and celebration fuel. Now, let's look at the actual science, such as it was, behind brewing beer in ancient Mesopotamia. Don't worry, you won't need a lab coat. Just a nose for barley, a tolerance for warm liquids, and maybe a helpful goat or two. You begin the day outside a modest home with a slightly smoky courtyard. The woman running the show is not a priestess. She's a mother, brewer, negotiator, and, according to the neighborhood, makes the second best beer on this street. The competition is real. She shows you a basket of bapir, a type of dense, twice-baked barley bread used almost exclusively for brewing. It's rock-hard, honey-colored, and smells faintly of fig and smoke. You wouldn't eat it. Not unless you lost a bet. But soak it in water with a little mashed date, and it becomes the foundation of beer. She tosses 2 loaves into a large ceramic vat, already filled with warm water and sprouted grains. You stir. Yes, again. You're basically an honorary Mesopotamian by now. As the bread dissolves, the mixture thickens into something between porridge and regret. The smell is heavy and comforting. A nearby boy sprinkles in dried, crushed dates. His little sister helpfully adds a pinch of sand. She's corrected. Firmly. Historians still argue whether this kind of brewing was standardized or intuitive. Recipes were rarely written down outside temples, but families brewed regularly. Was it passed down word of mouth? Trial and error? Divine inspiration mid-stir? The answer is yes, and probably whatever we had on hand. As the mash simmers gently over the fire, the woman explains her timing. There's no thermometer, no timer. She stirs until the smell shifts from raw grain to toasted sweetness. Then she pulls it off the heat and leaves it to cool. Cooling is crucial. Add yeast too early, and you murder it. Yeast, she explains, is shy, except they didn't know it was yeast. Not really. They called it the magic, or the blessing, and it lived in the air, in the vessel, in the dough. It was a trusted mystery, like how your grandma never measured anything and yet made perfect cookies every time. You sit back while she pours the cooled mash into a second jar, already seeded with some of the last batch's sediment. That's right, backslopping. A totally unappetizing word for a very clever technique. Old beer dregs equals new beer starter. Add it in, stir slowly, cover the top, and wait. Fermentation takes 1 or 2 days, depending on the weather. Longer if the breeze is lazy, shorter if the sun's in a hurry. You help her seal the jar with a cloth and smooth clay cap, then place it in a shaded nook of the house, wedged between baskets of lentils and a very judgmental cat. As you sit and wait, she tells you stories of beer gone wrong. One batch turned purple. One foamed endlessly for days. Another simply never fermented, dead as a rock. The family dog wouldn't even sniff it. That's part of the process. Beer is alive. It can't be bullied. It must be coaxed. You drift for a while, eyes half closed, as the afternoon heat folds itself over the courtyard like a thick wool blanket. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing an old brewing song, mostly about barley, partly about love, and briefly about ants. You awaken to the smell of fermenting grain, sharp, slightly sweet, unmistakable. The jar is bubbling faintly, like a soft whisper underwater. It's alive. It's working. In another 2 days, it'll be strained, jarred, and possibly shared at a neighbor's dinner. Maybe it'll be good. Maybe it'll be great. Maybe they'll say it tastes like socks. It doesn't matter. The act of brewing, more than the end result, is what ties this household to every other in the city. Beer is a ritual, a rhythm, a household heartbeat. You wander back through the city as the sky pinks. You pass other courtyards, other jars, other lives. Some are mid-ferment, others just starting. Some smell wonderful. Others are a warning. You duck into a market alley and spot a man selling beer additives, spices, herbs, and things that look suspiciously like burnt twigs. He's got ground coriander, wild honey, even dried pomegranate skin. You ask if these improve the flavor. He grins. Or hide the failures. There's a quiet beauty in the way every family brews their own blend. Some go sweeter, some sour. Some accidentally invent something like soup. But all of them are creating their own answer to the same ancient question: how do you make water better? And now, as the stars begin blinking to life above the rooftops, and the last warm breeze stirs your tunic, you realize the beer you tasted today, handmade, unpredictable, mildly fizzy, might not win awards. But it connects you to people across time in a way few things can. And yes, you're technically drinking warm, fermented barley porridge. But hey, so is everyone else. The morning sun creeps over the rooftops again, gilding the city's mud-brick skyline in a soft gold that makes even the goat pens look noble. Today, you're venturing somewhere different. Not a temple, not a home, but something between a neighborhood tavern. Though don't let that word fool you. This isn't the Mesopotamian version of a sports bar. There are no flat screens, no beer nuts, and definitely no karaoke. Instead, you find a small, shaded structure just off the main street, nestled beside a stall selling fish so pungent you can smell them in your dreams. The tavern has no sign, but everyone knows it's there. You can tell by the cluster of customers leaning on its cracked walls and the soft murmur of gossip floating out like incense. Inside, it's dim and smoky. The ceiling beams are low enough to bump your head if you're too proud to duck. A large clay vat rests in the center of the room, and around it sit locals, farmers, herders, merchants, each with a cup and a story. You're handed a reed straw and a suspicious look. Both are standard. The beer here isn't like the sacred stuff at the temple. It's chunkier, stronger, bolder. And the flavor profile? Let's say bold barnyard with hints of sweet rot. You sip anyway. Peer pressure is eternal. Your hostess is a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who runs the place with a ladle in one hand and a curse for the lazy in the other. She's what you'd call a beer lady, or sabatu. And don't let the term fool you. These women were the backbone of local economies. Brewers, barkeeps, debt collectors, social mediators. Also, occasionally, spies. Historians still debate the exact legal and social status of tavern keepers. Some were revered, others not so much. Babylonian law codes suggest they were often watched closely. In fact, there's a whole section of Hammurabi's code dedicated to tavern misdeeds, including price gouging and the classic conspiring with criminals. And if a beer lady shortchanged customers or harbored fugitives, let's just say it ended with a very public swim in the river. Weighted. But this woman, she's untouchable. Her beer is known, her temper is legend, and her clients behave, mostly. You watch as a few regulars shuffle in, settling into their usual spots with the reverence of church pew-sitters. One is a scribe, his fingernails still black with ink. Another looks like he hasn't bathed since the last eclipse. They talk of irrigation ditches, barley theft, temple rumors, and the latest market scandal. Someone tried to pass off donkey butter as imported cow butter. Outrageous. You sip more of your beer and begin to notice something. This place is more than a pub. It's a pressure valve for the community. Grievances get aired here. Debts negotiated. Marriages announced. Insults softened. Occasionally, arguments break out, but they usually end with someone slipping under the table, not a bar fight. The sabatu ladles out more beer, pausing to adjust a clay tablet behind the counter. You squint and see it's a ledger, her records of who owes what. There are tally marks, symbols for barley, and the occasional passive-aggressive note. Kidu did not pay for second jar. Again. You ask her how she keeps the beer cool. She smirks and leads you to the rear of the building. There, you find a shallow pit in the floor lined with river stones and shaded by thick woven mats. The beer jars rest here during the day, out of the sun, sometimes wrapped in damp cloth. The evaporating moisture draws out a few degrees of heat, primitive but surprisingly effective. If there's a breeze, she says, it's even better. Occasionally, she'll bury the jars slightly in the earth. Or, in wealthier places, a bit of snow brought down from the distant Zagros Mountains is mixed into a cooling jar. Not directly, of course. That would be wasteful, but placed nearby to nudge the temperature just enough. There's an entire craft to not just brewing beer, but keeping it drinkable through the region's searing summers. No fridges, no ice boxes, just ingenuity, patience, and a lot of damp fabric. You re-enter the tavern to find someone reciting poetry. It's not very good poetry, but everyone listens. Beer and verse go hand in hand, even if the lines mostly rhyme mud with crud. It doesn't matter. The sound is calming. The smell, familiar. The temperature, tolerable. You lean back against the wall, your cup resting on the floor beside you. The laughter flows, warm and slow. A man gently snores across the room, his reed straw still in his mouth. No one wakes him, and you're just another quiet figure in the dim light of a beer house that's been standing longer than most cities in the modern world have existed. You hear someone mention a festival. Tomorrow, perhaps, there'll be singing, masks, dancing, and, yes, plenty of beer. Naturally, it's not a proper celebration unless someone forgets what they're celebrating. So you finish your drink, hand back the reed, and step out into the fading light, just a little slower than before. The beer isn't cold, not really, but the memory of its cooling clay, its shared straw, and the laughter that followed, that lingers. The next morning arrives soft and hazy, like warm dough rising. You shuffle through the waking streets, dodging stray chickens and avoiding eye contact with a man who clearly celebrated too hard last night. Today, you're heading toward the city outskirts, to the barley fields themselves. Because if beer is the soul of Mesopotamia, barley is the bones. You pass through the gates and into a sprawl of irrigated farmland. The scent changes instantly, from city dust and old fish to green things, damp soil, and a surprising hint of mint. You follow a narrow path carved between canals, lined with reeds that hum faintly in the wind. Somewhere, a frog chorus rehearses for tonight. Ahead, a farmer waves you over. His skin is sun-darkened, his robe patched with dignity and a bit of ash. He's been growing barley for longer than most of the city's walls have been standing. And he'll tell you the same thing twice, because he suspects you're not listening the first time. You learn that barley is not just a beer grain. It's a currency, a calendar, a personality test. Its growth stages, sprout, shoot, green, gold, brittle, mark the passing of seasons. Entire civic rituals revolve around its harvest. Even tax collection waits for the barley. The farmer shows you how he plants it, not by tossing seeds randomly, but by gently placing them in soft furrows made with a wooden plow pulled by 2 groaning oxen. He mutters to the animals like they're misbehaving nephews. They respond by farting, loudly. Once planted, the fields are flooded, then drained, then flooded again. Irrigation is everything here. Without those slow trickling channels, dug by hand, maintained with sweat, barley dies, and with it, the city's beer, you suddenly have great respect for ditches. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian farmers used crop rotation or just pushed the same exhausted soil until the gods intervened. Some evidence shows fallow fields and composting. Others suggest a plant it and pray approach. Either way, the barley usually grew. Usually. You kneel to examine a stalk. It's stiff, tall, and dense with grain. You try to pull one free and accidentally dislodge 3. The farmer sighs but says nothing. You are forgiven. Sort of. Barley here isn't like modern barley. It's shorter, hardier, adapted to survive the floods of the Tigris and Euphrates. You see women collecting heads of grain in baskets, their hands swift and sure. The chaff will be crushed, the husks saved for feed or fire, and the grain, if lucky, brewed into something drinkable. A small child hands you a handful of barley kernels to chew. You do. It's like gravel flavored with toast. You nod approvingly. The child beams. You now have a fan club of 1. As the sun climbs, you find shade under a tree near the canal. The farmer joins you, bringing flatbread, onions, and a small jug of, what else, beer. It's warm, thin, and tastes faintly of molasses and hope. He explains that field beer is different. It's lighter, faster to brew, and meant for daytime consumption. Keeps you hydrated. Keeps the sun from making too many decisions for you. You both watch as a neighbor attempts to shoo a stubborn goose out of the grain shed. The goose wins. Later, you're shown the granary. It's low, cool, and filled with sacks of barley. A scribe is there, tablet in hand, tallying contributions. Every family owes a share to the temple or palace. This grain will be stored, redistributed, traded, or brewed into beer for festivals. It's a communal economy built on seeds and suds. You overhear a heated debate over whose barley is superior, northern or southern. It gets passionate. Someone uses the phrase, tastes like donkey tears. Another counters with, yours smells like river socks. A third man, clearly the philosopher of the group, simply mutters, all beer is good beer if it's free. And in the corner of the granary, you spot something odd, a rat trap carved from terracotta. A reminder that even in a city of gods and scribes, rats still party like it's 1999, BCE. The farmer insists you try threshing. You do. It's exhausting. Your arms ache, your back protests, and your technique is gently mocked by a grandmother who can't weigh more than a chicken. Eventually, the sun begins to droop, and so do you. As you walk back toward the city, the fields hum with evening sounds. Crickets tune up. Water slaps lazily against canal walls. Somewhere, a group of farmers sing a harvest song, mostly about beer, partly about barley, and briefly about donkeys. You arrive at the city gates dust-covered, sun-warmed, and mildly tipsy. A guard offers you water. You accept, but only after confirming it's not just more beer pretending to be water. He laughs. This time, just water. But only because it's your first week. And as the gates close behind you and the barley fields fade into shadow, you realize something. That cup of beer you had at the temple, the one you thought was just a little sour, it took dozens of hands, hours of labor, and more patience than you've ever shown a houseplant. It's a miracle, really. And miracles, it turns out, grow best in mud and sunshine. The evening falls softly now, wrapping the city in a cloak of twilight and calm murmurs. You wander toward a quiet corner of Mesopotamia's vast marketplace. Not the noisy stalls filled with spices or textiles, but the modest, often overlooked beer merchants' booths. Here, you discover the final step in the ancient beer's journey, how it leaves the home or tavern and enters the wider world. These booths are simple. Wooden tables, clay jars sealed tight with bitumen, and traders who speak in hushed tones, eyeing both coins and customers with equal suspicion. The beer isn't just for drinking here. It's a commodity, a form of wealth, and sometimes even a sacred offering in disguise. You meet a merchant named Lugal, a tall man with a beard that looks like it's been caught in a sandstorm. He offers you a taste from a small ceramic cup. It's darker, richer, and has the faintest fizz, like the city's breath captured in a jar. Lugal explains the trade routes of beer, which stretch beyond the city walls, down the rivers, and across deserts. Beer traveled on donkeys and boats, tucked between sacks of grain and pottery. Some went to distant towns, others to temples where priests used it in ceremonies or distributed it to workers. But transporting beer was tricky. There were no bottles or cans, just fragile clay vessels that could crack or leak if handled poorly. To keep it fresh, merchants like Lugal developed clever ways to protect their precious cargo. They wrapped jars in straw mats, sealed them with extra layers of pitch, and stored them in cool cellars shaded by thick walls. In some cases, jars were buried underground for the journey, kind of like a primitive wine cooler. You almost expect someone to toss in a frozen goat at this point. But nope, just mud and sweat. Historians still argue how much beer was traded beyond Mesopotamia. Some say it was a local staple with modest reach. Others argue there's evidence of Mesopotamian beer influence as far away as the Indus Valley. The truth is probably somewhere in between, like most things involving ancient liquids. While chatting with Lugal, you notice an odd ritual among his customers. Before buying, they rub a small amount of beer onto their wrists or lips. It's a gesture of trust, a way to ensure quality and freshness. Like a modern sommelier swirling wine, but stickier and less refined. You try it yourself. The taste lingers, earthy, malty, with a whisper of smoke. It's oddly comforting, like a handshake made of barley and friendship. Then Lugal tells you about beer taxes, a favorite topic of any ancient city administrator. Tax collectors often demanded payments in beer or barley. Sometimes, the government even controlled the breweries directly to regulate quality and supply. It was a way to keep both the city and its beer economy running smoothly. You ask about counterfeit beer. Surely, someone tried to pass off watered-down or spoiled batches. Lugal chuckles. Of course. That's why we have taste tests, seals, and, sometimes, very loud yelling. You imagine a Mesopotamian version of a consumer complaint hotline, but with more shouting and fewer elevators. As night deepens, the marketplace quiets, and you find yourself lingering near the riverbanks, watching the moon's reflection shimmer on the water. Somewhere upstream, you hear the faint clatter of a boat unloading barley sacks. You sip the last of your beer, warm and full of stories. You think about the journey, from barley fields to brewing vats, from humble homes to bustling markets. Every drop is a testament to human patience, invention, and a shared desire to make the ordinary extraordinary. And, as the city sleeps, you realize that while the beer may be simple, the story behind it is rich, complex, and just a little bit magical. The sun is now high, casting sharp shadows across the city's labyrinthine streets. Your journey takes you inside one of Mesopotamia's famed brewing houses, where the art and science of beer-making meet in a symphony of sounds, smells, and slow, deliberate motions. The brewing house is a large earthen structure with thick walls that keep the inside pleasantly cool, despite the heat outside. Massive clay vats dominate the space, filled with bubbling mash that smells like warm bread and honey. You notice that the floors are sprinkled with sand to absorb spills and prevent slipping, a practical touch. Your guide, a middle-aged man named Enki, is proud of his trade. He shows you how barley is soaked, mashed, and heated over carefully controlled fires fueled by date palm wood. The smoke curls upward, carrying with it subtle hints of sweetness and earthiness that will infuse the beer. Enki explains that the brewing process was as much about timing as ingredients. The mixture needed to rest, ferment, and be stirred at specific intervals. Too early, and the yeast dies. Too late, and the beer sours. You listen closely, but secretly you wonder if the original brewers just guessed and got lucky most days. Historians still argue about the role of yeast in Mesopotamian beer. Some think wild yeast naturally present in the environment started fermentation. Others propose early brewers had primitive ways of capturing and reusing yeast, a technique rediscovered millennia later. Whatever the truth, the process was surprisingly sophisticated. One quirky detail Enki shares is the use of date syrup as a sweetener. While barley provides starches, dates added flavor and fermentable sugars. This made Mesopotamian beer richer and somewhat sticky, far from the crisp lagers we know today, but beloved all the same. You watch as the brewers scoop thick foam from the vats, a prized ingredient called bapir, a type of barley bread baked specifically for brewing. Bapir is dried, crumbled, and rehydrated to add depth and body to the beer. The brewers handle it like sacred relics, careful not to crush or waste a crumb. Enki invites you to taste a sample straight from the vat. The beer is cloudy, slightly sour, and unexpectedly fizzy. A wild, living drink. It's almost like the city itself is breathing through this fermented concoction. You notice a small figure in the corner, a cat, perched lazily atop a barrel. Enki jokes that cats are the brewery's best friends, keeping pesky rodents away from precious grain. The cat blinks slowly at you, a silent guardian of the brew. The brewing house also doubles as a social hub. Workers take breaks to share stories, play dice games, and sip from communal cups. The atmosphere is relaxed, even joyful, contrasting with the intense focus required during brewing. You ask about quality control. How did brewers ensure consistency? Enki shrugs. A lot came down to experience and the gods' favor. He recites a short blessing to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, as if to underline the sacred trust placed in each batch. As the day fades, you feel a deep appreciation for the craftsmanship and community surrounding every pitcher of Mesopotamian beer. It's more than a drink. It's a story, a ritual, a bond. And as you step back into the cooling evening air, you carry with you the warmth of fire, grain, and centuries-old traditions swirling gently in your thoughts. The next morning is a crisp one, the air filled with the gentle hum of waking city life. You find yourself drawn toward the quieter side streets, where the humbler brewers operate, those who craft beer not for temples or wealthy patrons but for the everyday people, the workers, and the children. Here, the beer is different, lighter, simpler, sometimes even mixed with herbs and spices to suit local tastes, or to soothe the stomach after a long day. You watch as a woman adds sprigs of juniper to her brew, explaining it's believed to aid digestion and bring sweet dreams. You lean closer, catching the soft fizz as the mixture ferments in large, unglazed pots. The aroma is faintly piney and earthy, not unlike a walk through a forest after rain. This section of the city breathes with the rhythms of ordinary life. Children laughing as they chase pigeons, merchants calling out to passers-by, and the steady drip of water from a nearby fountain. You feel a comforting sense of belonging, as though this simpler beer reflects the city's heartbeats most honestly. There's a peculiar ritual you observe. Before drinking, brewers and drinkers dip their fingers into the beer and touch their foreheads, temples, and chins. This small gesture is a quiet blessing, an ancient habit passed down without quite knowing why, perhaps to invite good fortune or simply to savor the moment. Historians still argue why beer was such an everyday staple. Some suggest it was safer than water, thanks to the boiling and fermentation processes. Others say it was a source of nutrition and calories, a liquid bread that fueled the city's tireless workers. Likely, it was all of the above, a delicious multitasker. You meet a jovial brewer named Dumuzi who chuckles as he describes his job as liquid goldsmith. He tells you that beer here was often diluted with water, especially for children and the elderly, and sweetened with a dash of date syrup or wild herbs. There's a charming messiness to this beer-making, a few spills, some laughter, and an unexpected visitor, a friendly dog that sneaks a taste when no one's looking. Dumuzi swears the dog has better taste than half the customers. As the afternoon shadows lengthen, you reflect on how beer shaped social bonds. Sharing a cup was a form of friendship, a way to mark celebrations, and sometimes a balm after hard days. And somewhere in the background a distant melody rises, a soft song about barley fields and cold rivers, a lullaby for the city. As it moves gently toward evening, the sky shifts toward dusk as you wander toward the outskirts of the city, where you discover something unexpected: the role of beer in medicine and healing. Unlike the tavern's easy cheer, here beer takes on a more serious, nurturing character. You enter a modest clinic where an older man named Ia tends to patients using remedies that blend barley beer with herbs, oils, and prayers. The smell is warm and herbal, comforting, in a way that feels both familiar and mysterious. EA tells you how beer was used to soothe ailments like stomach aches, fatigue, and even minor wounds. It wasn't just a drink for pleasure. It was a trusted remedy, part of a healing ritual that combined the physical and the spiritual. You watch as Ea mixes beer with myrrh and fenugreek, creating a thick, fragrant poultice. He applies it gently to a young woman's arm, murmuring a prayer to the gods for swift recovery. It's a quiet moment, filled with patience and hope. Historians still debate how effective these remedies were. Some see beer's alcohol and nutrients as genuinely beneficial, while others think its role was mostly symbolic, a comforting placebo wrapped in ritual. Either way, the beer's place in medicine reveals its deeper significance beyond just social drinking. EA shares an intriguing tidbit. Some brewers believed the foam atop the beer was where the healing spirits lived. They carefully skimmed it off and used it in treatments or as offerings. You also learn about the use of crocodile dung as a sunscreen and antiseptic, an odd practice documented alongside beer medicine, reminding you that ancient health care was a blend of observation, tradition, and a dash of the peculiar. Despite the strange remedies, the clinic feels like a sanctuary, a place where beer's warmth meets human kindness. You sip a small cup of lightly fermented brew, feeling the cool liquid soothe your throat. As night falls, the clinic's soft glow fades into the city's quiet hum. You think about beer's journey from grain fields to healing hands, a thread woven through daily life and ancient beliefs. And as you rest beneath the stars, you realize that in Mesopotamia, beer was more than just a drink. It was a companion in health, a balm for the soul, and a gentle whisper from the past. Night deepens over Mesopotamia, and you find yourself wandering toward the quieter neighborhoods, where the city's more curious customs come alive, particularly those surrounding beer and social rituals that might seem unusual to a modern eye, but were everyday here. You stumble upon a small gathering of friends seated on woven mats beneath date palms, sharing beer from a large communal bowl. Their laughter is soft, and the air carries a faint aroma of roasted spices and incense. This is a moment of connection, a pause from the day's toil. One of the men, a storyteller named Enmeduranki, leans forward and recounts a tale that has been told for generations, about the origins of beer gifted by the goddess Ninkasi herself. His voice is low and rhythmic, almost hypnotic, as you feel the story weaving into the night air like a gentle lullaby. Interestingly, in these social settings, beer served as a social equalizer. Rich or poor, everyone drank from the same bowl. It was a shared experience that fostered community and sometimes eased tensions after long disputes. This communal drinking tradition hints at a society that valued connection over hierarchy, at least in these quiet moments. Historians still debate whether these gatherings were as widespread as texts suggest or idealized memories recorded by scribes. But you can see the truth in the warmth and camaraderie of this group. You notice a quirky custom. Before drinking, each person dips a finger into the beer and touches it to their lips, forehead, and chest, almost like a silent prayer or a blessing. You recall seeing this earlier in the city, a recurring gesture linking strangers through a small, shared ritual. The beer here is thick and slightly sour, brewed with local herbs thought to promote relaxation and good dreams. One of the women hands you a small cup infused with lavender and mint, and you feel a calmness settling over your thoughts. As you listen to Enma Duranke's stories, you realize that these moments of shared beer are less about the drink itself and more about the stories, the laughter, and the human connections that blossom alongside it. The night carries on, filled with quiet songs, soft voices, and the gentle clinking of cups, a lullaby not just for your ears, but for your soul. The moon rises high, casting silvery light over the city, and you find yourself drawn to a quieter, shadowed corner, a place where beer intersects with the laws and regulations of Mesopotamian society. Here, the balance between order and indulgence is maintained with surprising care. You step into a large hall, its walls inscribed with cuneiform tablets, official decrees and rules that governed brewing, selling, and drinking beer. These laws were surprisingly detailed, reflecting how important beer was to everyday life. One tablet catches your eye. It sets the price of the beer by volume and punishes dishonest brewers who watered it down. You imagine a stern official stomping through the marketplace, measuring cups in hand, ready to catch cheaters. The thought brings a small smile. Even 4,000 years ago, folks disliked being shortchanged. Historians still argue how strictly these laws were enforced. Some say they were mostly symbolic, idealistic attempts to regulate complex trade. Others believe local officials took their duties seriously, as beer was a major economic commodity and social staple. Another surprising rule is about who could brew and sell beer. While women dominated household brewing, only licensed men could sell it publicly. This distinction highlights a fascinating divide between domestic and commercial spheres. You also learn about regulations around drinking in public. There were times and places where it was encouraged, like festivals, and others where drunkenness was frowned upon, especially near temples or during official ceremonies. One quirky detail you uncover is that some beer sellers were required to keep a beer ledger, a record of all sales and debts, a reminder that even in ancient times, accounting was serious business. The legal framework around beer reveals it was more than just a drink. It was woven into the city's social fabric, economy, and morality in subtle and complex ways. As you step back into the moonlit streets, you realize that beer was not just a daily pleasure, but a regulated rhythm of life, one that shaped and was shaped by the people of Mesopotamia. The first pale light of dawn filters through your window as you drift back to the heart of the city, where beer's story begins to fold gently into the everyday rhythms of life. Today, you explore the lasting legacy of Mesopotamian brewing, how this ancient craft echoes through history and into our modern world. You picture fields of barley stretching far beyond the city, tended by farmers who understood the grain's secret potential. You imagine taverns bustling with patrons, the clink of clay cups punctuating the evening air. These scenes are not frozen in time. They ripple forward, influencing civilizations thousands of years later. You learn that many modern brewing techniques trace their roots back to Mesopotamian innovations, like using bread, bapir, to kickstart fermentation, or the ritualistic hymns to Ninkasi that doubled as recipes. In a way, every frothy sip you enjoy today carries a whisper from those ancient brewers. Historians still debate how much of Mesopotamia's beer culture spread to neighboring regions versus how much developed independently. Yet, the archaeological evidence of brewing tools and texts found across the Middle East points to a rich, shared tradition. A quirky thought crosses your mind. Mesopotamian beer was often more nutritious than some modern beers, packed with vitamins and minerals. Imagine that. Your ancestors might have been inadvertently healthier with each mug. You pause to reflect on the deep connection between beer and culture, how it has been a social glue, a medicinal aid, and a sacred ritual for millennia. From grain to glass, from gods to everyday workers, beer embodies a shared human story. As the city slowly wakes, you feel a tender sense of gratitude. The warmth of the ancient fires, the laughter of brewers, and the soft hum of fermentation are all part of a timeless melody. And as you settle down once more, the gentle memory of Mesopotamian beer lulls you toward rest, a soothing echo of a world long gone but never forgotten. The soft glow of morning fades as your thoughts quiet. Imagine the barley fields whispering in the breeze, the gentle clinking of cups fading into silence. Feel the warm earth beneath your feet, the cool rush of river water nearby. Let the story settle around you like a comforting blanket. Rest easy, knowing that you carry a sip of ancient history within you now. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and drift gently into dreams as soft as foam on a freshly poured beer.